Good. Well, welcome back to this final part of the Think 2030 conference. This is the final stretch. We have been working hard. We've had 4 round tables this morning. Intense discussions. I was able to sit into 2 of them. Important topics, game-changing topics, game-changing policies that the European Commission, European Parliament institutions are working on right now. We're going to hear a snapshot of what went on in those roundtables from the rapporteurs from those roundtables. So I'm going to pass the floor in no particular order. First to Harriet Bradley, who's head of programme at the Institute for European Environment Policy, Sustainable Food Systems, and she will give a short intro on that topic. What happened in that room?
Many things happened in that room, as people who were there were aware. But yeah, we had a very lively discussion on the EU's proposal for a sustainable food systems law. There seems to be a lot of excitement around it and a lot of enthusiasm and ambition, which was really great to hear, and we heard that even from the Commission representative themselves. So that was my first point to underline, that I was quite energised by the strong ambition that seemed to be there, to the recognition of the science, that if we want to solve many of the sustainability challenges that we face on the environment, climate, and on the health and social side, then we really have to transform our food systems. And there's also an increasing understanding, I think, that we've seen the impacts of crises like the current war in Ukraine, but that is just a kind of, a short-term blip in a longer series of kind of crises within the food system, a broken food system, and one in which actually climate impacts are probably going to represent some of the biggest threat and the biggest crises to come when it comes to food production. So across the board, people are referring to the droughts across Europe that are hampering harvests. And so I think that there is a moment, I think, of recognition and an opportunity for realizing that we really have to solve these crises also in order to provide for a long-term viability of food production. So that was my first point, a strong ambition and a recognition of the science, which we shouldn't always take for granted. There were some points of divergence, which are good to lay out. So I think there was a big question is, what is the relationship of this law, which is trying to do something very overarching to create new requirements from production to consumption? How does this law actually interact with the biggest policy that the EU currently has on agriculture, which is the Common Agricultural Policy and the subsidies, and differences in opinion between people saying that, including what was advocated in our paper, that actually there should be a mechanism where this law can actually bind the CAP to the achievement of certain targets, for example, on emissions reductions and biodiversity loss, versus others saying that these should be kept separate, which I think was more the view of the representative of the member state in discussion. And one other point of divergence was on the idea of whether we should be really pushing for a stronger regulation. A lot of people were arguing for that, including a person from the Commission from DG Sante working on the regulation itself, or on the proposal, arguing that for the fact that voluntary approaches haven't been enough up until now, so there might be a role, but they haven't really delivered the systemic change that we need to see, so we need actually now binding targets at EU level, versus others who were saying maybe we need a softer approach. This was especially coming from a member state. We had Sweden, a representative from the Swedish ministry, who was talking for maybe a need for something a bit softer, where member states obviously have more flexibility to encourage sort of more sustainable practices. So obviously there may be an expected divergence there, but interesting that's obviously the challenge that is often policymakers have to work with when trying to bring in new regulation at the EU level, and there will be more work needed to bring member states along and convince them of the need for something binding. My final point is on governance, because this has been brought up throughout the conference, and it came up again in the session. So the need for a much more participatory governance, so better involvement of a wider range of stakeholders than you currently see at the EU level, where on agriculture and food policies it has been traditionally dominated by well-resourced lobby groups. So there needs to be an effort actually to expand that, and there's already some change in the approach in that it's the DG Santé responsible for this law rather than DG Agri has traditionally been the DG who oversees everything related to agriculture at the EU level. So there's already some shifts that can be seen, but I think that there's even more improvements that need to be made to make this really participatory and to make sure that when the proposal moves from the Commission to the Council and the Parliament, that there's a broader range of stakeholders than just the traditional interests represented.
Thank you so much. I mean, that's such a hot topic. All of the 4 topics we could talk about for an hour, but we're going to talk just a couple of minutes each, the main points. I'll pass now to Nicolas Bermond, who's going to talk about just transition and Fit for 55 hot points.
Yes, thank you very much. So on our side, we discussed a topic that was really up in the news because we referred many times to the agreement that was reached at the EU Council on the Fit for 55 files, and also the context of energy price crisis. Energy prices are high, so the question of how we deal with it is already there on the table, in a sense. So 3 points on that. I think 3 main takeaways I take from the conversation we had. The first one is for the carbon price to work, you need alternatives to be ready, to be already there, and that impacts both the question of timing, because the extension, the new ETS on buildings and road transport will come in 2027, so we need to be ready before that, so invest from today. And the second thing, on the use of carbon revenues as such, it's important not only to send checks to people, but also to use this money to invest in long-term solutions, energy renovation, clean mobility solutions, etc. So that's my first takeaway. The second takeaway would be, and it's kind of, I like the counterpoint you gave to the current discussion on this, is the question of who you should target. And someone made this comment to say that lately we are saying a lot we should target the poor, we should target the vulnerable. He wasn't disagreeing with that. They said it's as much important to target the middle class because politically in democracies, if we want the system to work for everyone, we need to find solutions for a majority of people, and refer specifically to the question of not only having targeted measures but also build social welfare as such, coming back with solutions that works for everyone and are available for everyone in the society. That's the second point. And the third point, I think, more on where the money should come from. Just a reference, because in the conversation we referred a lot on the proposal on the Social Climate Fund. And Social Climate Fund, we shouldn't put all our eggs in this basket, because if we look to the transition needs in terms of investments, it's much wider than that, and we shouldn't bet that Social Climate Fund will solve all the issues beyond that. So what I interpret on that is that it gives the idea of we should kind of climate mainstream or transition mainstream in all EU budget to find the appropriate amounts that are necessary to foster the transition. That's going to be it for me. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Nicola. I'm going to pass now to Evelyn Underwood. She's head of program, and she's going to talk about nature restoration.
Thank you. Yes, we had a great, truly hybrid session discussing the proposal the Commission published last week for a nature restoration law. And we were pleased that we got a lot of echo on the opportunities that we see for this law. So we explored what it would mean for our remaining nature in the EU, which, as you know, is being rapidly lost. But as pointed out by a participant, this law would also be about bringing nature back into our cities for people's well-being, And it would be about bringing it back into our farming landscapes for long-term climate resilient production. We also heard a call for more attention to making people aware of the opportunities and increasing support for really bringing the business case forward for this. It's easy to see when you see a dam being removed and a river come back to life. Yes, this is restoration, but there's also smaller steps, and sometimes it takes a long time. We need to start doing it right now. Important here is that member states will be required under the law to plan restoration with participation from the civil society, from the private sector, from the affected sectors. We also, of course, talked about funding. The EU's funding, of course, where the CAP plays a big role, but also there are many other ways in which EU funds can be used for restoration. But we also had some good inputs on how the private sector could play a bigger role in this to get more investment. And there was a concrete proposal for a credit system that we will follow up on. Finally, with our nature restoration experts in the room, we really got into how to measure and monitor what we're restoring. We're talking about ecological integrity. What does that mean in a changing climate? We need to look at the functions, the services that ecosystems are providing. And we talked about the rapidly increasing scope for using artificial intelligence and satellite monitoring. We know now much more about our state of our environment and can follow it more closely. We wrapped up with a quick poll of participants in the room and online to see whether people thought that the Commission had got it right on the level of ambition of the targets. And the big majority thought that the proposal was at the right level of ambition. So we're quite heartened by that, and we'll follow up on this work. And thank you all for your contributions, and we look forward to receiving more.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Evelyn. And now, last but not least, Marcus Gerring from the University of Cambridge, and he's going to share what happened in the CBAM roundtable.
Yes, thank you very much. So Pierre ably shared our panel and would have been here if he hadn't been called off back to Brussels. 4 take-home messages, I think, from our panel on the CBAM, which in our view supports the implementation of the Paris Agreement on climate change. The first take-home message is that CBAM is here to stay. We have some form of alignment between the 3 institutions in the European Union. So with a level of confidence, we said that CBAM has a realistic prospect. The question is a little bit about timing and what exactly the details are that are being negotiated. The second take-home message is that, and Isabel from the Jacques Delors Institute emphasized that CBAM needs to be communicated to trading partners, right? In order to avoid friction, we need to early communicate, we need to exchange, we need to use the free trade agreement dialogue mechanisms to highlight what the European Union is planning. Camilla from Ecologic highlighted that a part of CBAM could be the idea of a climate club, as sort of expanded on in the G7 communiqué, but then also included in the council conclusions this week. And finally, I talked about legal compatibility, and we broadly concluded that WTO compatibility is possible, but will depend on the details. And so the transition periods and the phase-out of free allowances are key components for WTO compatibility. I should say that Laura, even though she worked for the French Treasury and was very busy for the last 6 months during the presidency, was still upbeat about the prospects of CBAM. And some of the questions from the audience really focused in on the details and the impact on developing country trading partners of the EU. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much to all of our for rapporteurs. Thank you to all four of you. And to if you want to input any more, you online and also in the room, to the rapporteurs, to those groups, then get in contact with IEEP. Thank you all to you. If you could take your seats. Thank you so much. And I'd like to welcome now for this last panel discussion to the stage, MEP, Member of the European Parliament, Sirpa Pietikäinen, who is a Finnish member of the European Parliament, a long advocate and friend of Think2030. I remember chatting with you, Sirpa, at the first Think2030 conference all that time ago. Welcome to the stage. Thank you very much.
Good to be here.
There we are. Good to be here. It's good for all of us to be here. Changing the future. And also to Saeed El Khadraoui, who is joining us from the European Environment Agency, direct, I'm sure, by train from Copenhagen. Welcome to the stage. Thank you very much. And a round of applause for you as well. Did I manage that, Saeed? And also we've got online with us, who is in transport, actually, on a train, Artur Runga Metzger, who is fellow of the Mercator Research Institute on Global Commons and Climate Change and former European Commission climate negotiator. So I'm going to check with the technology. Is Artur ready to speak? Artur, welcome. Over to you. You're live.
Okay, do you want me to start?
Yes, please. Now.
Okay. I think the topic of the panel is to give some advice to the incoming Czech presidency of what needs to be done. And I think the first thing that comes to my mind is Sharm el-Sheikh towards November this year, where I think the world is expecting to raise ambition. And I think that's very much linked to what is being negotiated, going to be negotiated in the trilogues during the second half of this year, the Fit for 55. And I think there's some particular tasks that probably were not foreseen when the whole package was put onto the table, and that comes from the Ukraine crisis, but also from the pandemic and the recovery. One is that into the Fit for 55, where we now have a common position, and we also have the Parliament position, we need to integrate energy sovereignty. And I think that the Czech presidency knows all about energy sovereignty. It has been mentioned already in the proposal of the EU, of the Commission, the Repower EU, that one needs to increase the targets for renewable energy and also energy efficiency, that energy consumption needs to be reduced. And I must say, I was a bit disturbed by the fact that when energy ministers met last week, they didn't do it straight away, or the environment ministers during this week, because that would have been a very strong signal. What Europe will also have to work on is the fallout of the potential embargo on gas. And I think here all member states will have to have these emergency plans. And I think it's a big likelihood that this is going to start from the Russian side rather sooner than later. I think what should also be considered during the Czech presidency is still to think of, if the embargo is not coming from the Russian side, whether one should not impose import tariffs on Russian gas and oil in order to stop feeding the war, the conflict with the Ukraine and that aggression. The third point that is going to be important is to ensure just transition when negotiating the Fit for 55 package during the autumn. And here I think it's first and foremost welcome that all parties, the Council and also the European Parliament, have endorsed the concept of the Social Climate Fund, but probably more needs to be done in order to really tackle the issues of energy poverty during the coming months and the coming year in particular. So the Social Climate Fund, of course, will only start in a couple of years' time. In the meantime, something else will have to be done in order to help moving forward. What is also important is a discussion among member states in terms of what are the right policies to cushion the impacts of the energy crisis on households. And unfortunately, I think we have seen many measures that were going across the board, kind of flat rates on reducing VATs and so on, which took and take away the price signal that we need in order to reduce emissions. So I think that is something that needs to be looked at. The fourth point that becomes very important and crucial is the whole issue of financing. I think we see finance ministers getting worried already, and finance ministers wanting to reduce the debt burden. So it's going to be important in the Fit for 55 package to see what are new sources of financing the transition in the coming years. And I think there are better efforts that can be made looking at the proposals. There's some there, but maybe one needs to get further. My final remark would be that one, when looking at the Fit for 55 package, needs to look beyond the year 2030. The Fit for 55 package lays the foundation or the starting point for looking beyond 2030. But there is important tasks, and it's going to get much more difficult after 2030 to get the framework right. One point here is that Europe will have to look at carbon dioxide removals and how to integrate that into the policy framework. And here I think the discussion needs to start. It will be kicked off with the certification proposal of the Commission that is coming in autumn. With that, I would stop my initial remarks in terms of giving good advice to the Czech presidency.
Thank you very much, Artur. We heard you loud and clear. Well done for that technological feat. Well done. Thank you. We're talking here about next steps for Green Deal implementation. We've heard now from Artur from the train on the move. We're now going to hear from Sirpa Petikainen. Sirpa, what do you think? What's coming up?
Well, as usual, I'll start with the, do you want to hear the bad news or good news first? And the bad news is actually that this kind of opposition or resistance towards the sustainability is increasing, like it has been increasing for quite some time. It is then when you really start seeing that you need to do something and you can't change without doing some change. Then you get sort of the oil sector, you get the coal sector, you get the Copacosegas and farmers, you get the bioenergy, you get whatever saying, no. Let's continue at least some of the time as we did yesterday because the party is nice. And then someone really needs to come there and to say that now it's the blink, no more drinks. Basically, this is the, well, just when we are having the fun. And why it is increasing? Because the longer you wait, the more drastic and more difficult are the changes. And this is something, and this is the mental resistance, very human stuff that we need to be prepared. And secondly, on this, I just would like to pick up that changing the situation is not impossible, even though you have increasing resistance. And this was seen with the RRF, the famous Resilience and Recovery Fund. When a group of MEPs and NGOs started talking about that there needs to be this kind of an environmental aspect on it, it was like, what? Why? Now we need to concentrate on corona and on those ones that are suffering on the corona, not whatever energy transition and renovation wave and all that. Well, we were not that successful as we thought and we would have liked, and that comes to finances discussion, what I hear all about here too. We do have money. We have more money than ever with RRF, with Just Transition Fund, with Renovation Wave, with our cohesion funds, and shall I continue? The point is that we are not putting them on the right places. And if we would do, this is not the lack of the money. And we are still subsidizing nationally, EU level, not to talk about globally, the fossil industries and destructive practices for biodiversity and so on, with quite heavy loft subsidies. Actually, more money is used on that globally than what we use for healthcare and social expenditure altogether. So yes, this is not a question of money, but it is how you transfer it, and that is the political trick. Okay, then the good news, bad news, something in between. I heard what you summarized already, and this is the targeting middle class, and I think that this is a very interesting idea. Because you can't change politics without changing the voters, and this is basic fact. There's X number of voters for semi-radical people like myself, but there's the X number of the voters, roughly 30% for all kind of Trumps and Le Pens and you name it, that are the physical resistance. And they do not learn and they do not change because they can't and they are not expected. If they would, then the Yellow Vest or whoever would vote for someone else that meets the requirements. Right. So we need to pressure the politicians, but even more important is to target on the voters. A, to have them vote, and B, to have them support and to understand. And I think that there's the Think 2030 is one of the role. How do you sort of deliver the message via media, via direct contacts, via whatever? Then one is, and this is I know this organization is doing, try to embed the science-based thinking as a contrary to lobbying. Do, and hopefully you could get the money for that, do independent studies prior to politics when it is introduced, like the biodiversity, and then after it. Was it effective? What actually was done? And do it together with environmental agencies and others. Because there's a lot of studies going on, but you would need to be having a strong and bigger, actually, this kind of a network than the IPCC saying, okay, this is the fact. Now you are underachieving and this is going to cost like a hell. Third, related to that one, is the cost of non-action. And this should be, on my thinking, on the next political term, one thing to push through on member states and especially in the EU. Now on the impact assessment, you always can see the cost, and this is the X amount of euros it's going to cost to whatever farmers or drivers when the diesel price is going up. You never show that actually this party is going on and drills are free. It's not going to continue. And the cost you should be looking is the cost of non-action, as you know, and to compare on that, okay, what that shall cost after 10 years or 20 years, or if it is foreseen that it is tenfold, the COVID-19 costs around 2030. Then you are talking about the cost, and you have a headache how to finance it. Then I love the idea of the regulation, and that I link to that kind of a middle class, and this is the headache how you get it. I'm very excited about the sustainable food law, these kind of new elements we would need, and I dream of having this kind of a constitutional process of acknowledging the right of the nature and people's right for health and all that, this kind of a one planet concept there. And that should be on EU's treaties further on. Could someone start sort of a draft in this kind of like we have the social pillar, this kind of a one planet pillar for the treaties? Because then this could be something you apply on the common agricultural policy, industry policies, energy policies. And otherwise, there's always the risk that when you have a sustainable food law, what you mentioned, how it's going to impact the common agricultural policy, my guess would be nothing. Because there you have the farmers, there you have the interest groups, there you have the lobbyists, and it's really hard to change if there isn't sort of a, in quotes, some superpower that can't pass it. Okay, then last but not least, please do stop me if I'm going over my time, is how we can analyze and get the businesses sort of working with us, and sort of a push for businesses that they have enough ecological competencies on their boards to avoid sidetracks. This is the palm oils, this is the blue hydrogen, this is the long list that you know as well as I do what it is. And there's a strong pressure now when you need to do something, that you do something. You subsidize wrong things, you concentrate like in this repower, or the famous taxonomy and the role of the gas there and all that stuff. And these sort of seeing that when you are just running fast but to the wrong direction is something that we would need to have the antennas and science and NGOs to point that very strongly out. Okay, and so if we look for the next elections and beyond that, my sort of summary would be push for the sort of a Green Deal too, because this would need to be this kind of a continuous, like you have the agricultural policy, sort of a understanding, and then on the next term you have a Green Deal 3 or whatever. So you continue the textiles, buildings, food, circular economy, concentrate on protection and root causes instead of the outcomes and silos, what we quite often have, and try to integrate the climate politics on there. Plus then try to save and to have as part of the Green Deal the repower initiative, because if we really do it, it needs at least 10 years to restructure our energy networks and productions and energy efficiency and all that. And this shouldn't be this kind of a blink light during the Ukraine crisis and then you forget about it. And this needs a lot of push. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Yeah, as you just said, change always takes a long time, as we know, and you've been at it. I see MEP elected in 2008. So you've been at it a long time, and thank you on behalf of all of this group for the amount of work you do to shift the EPP, which is not always the most friendly and aligned group. I mean, you can't really judge by groups these days, but still, thank you very much. We're going to come back to questions to you afterwards, and also to Artur, who's I hope is still with us on the train listening. We're now going to pass directly to Saeed El Khadraoui from the EEA. What are your thoughts on the next steps for Green Deal implementation?
Well, thank you for inviting me. I will actually focus more on the social dimension, the just transition, the human factor in a way, because I think this will become key, and maybe even more now than we thought, let's say, a few months or a few years ago, because in the meantime we are confronted with these geopolitical events like the war in Ukraine, that may translate into difficult economic circumstances and also disrupt a bit the policy agenda. And Sirpa already referred to it. Increasingly, we see attempts by different lobbies, let's say, to slow down, water down essential parts of the Green Deal. And our key message as a knowledge-based institution, of course, is stick to the agenda. Science tells us that we have to act now, right? We have a comprehensive plan in the European Union, the Green Deal. It addresses climate, pollution, nature, and biodiversity. All these things are actually interlinked and need to be addressed holistically. There is also no need to wait until the legislative agenda has been fully addressed and implemented. I mean, this is crucial, of course. This is about the mechanics of how our economy works, but it may take a few more years, before it's really implemented. Even though it goes relatively fast. I read today that already in July trilogues may start to discuss the ETS, so that's good news. But it's also important to go one step further and try to connect the Green Deal agenda better with the economy and the society. And from the European Environment Agency perspective, we cannot really transform the key systems that define the way we live and work, like the production and consumption systems, the energy mobility, the food system, the built environment, without a systemic approach that includes a broader set of measures, right? That are truly transformational. And this requires a multi-level and a multi-stakeholders approach, where everybody is kind of activated to join the journey, right? And in this regard, the social dimension is of the essence, because without buy-in of citizens, we will never achieve the scale and the speed of the transformation needed. And of course, the social dimension has many ramifications, if you want. It includes the individual level, because much of the effects of climate change, but also of measures to address climate change, depend on the socio-demographic context, such as income level, employment situation, age. It also, of course, includes location, regional disparities, so it's a complex thing. And clearly, and I think it was also discussed earlier today, vulnerable people suffer first and most. They suffer already today because of the places where they live, in areas at higher risks of floods, for instance, or because they are not able to pay insurances, or their houses may be badly insulated. They cannot afford air conditioning, and so on. Maybe healthy food will become increasingly expensive. So for all of these reasons, the vulnerable people will suffer most. And we see actually similar trends if we zoom out and look at the European map. Regions with populations with lower socioeconomic status, or with a higher proportion of elderly people, for instance, they are affected most by high temperatures. Elsewhere in Europe, we see indeed that areas with higher unemployment rates tend to have larger areas at risks of flooding. So this is just a fact, right? And by contrast, it's the richest segments of the population that are contributing most to global warming and other environmental externalities due to their consumption patterns. So the issue of fairness is really crucial. And so we need to act fast to solve this, but taking ambitious steps, as we hope to do, on the other hand, is also likely to have social implications, because the cost of environmental measures may affect vulnerable people more than others. Pricing externalities of products and services, which is a key measure to really achieve behavioral change, or phasing out unsustainable practices, may also disproportionately affect lower income households, right? Because they spend relatively more on energy, because they cannot afford to do the necessary investment to transform their heating system, etc., etc. And at the same time, here again, subsidies to promote innovative and sustainable technologies such as electric cars, solar panels, are often taken up first by wealthy people, by middle-class people, creating wealth transfers away from those in need. And this applies also, to a certain extent, to climate adaptation measures. We actually just published a briefing yesterday. I invite you to read it. It's on our website, on climate adaptations and the social dimension, where it clearly says that vulnerable people tend to have lower access to green space, for instance, or that equity actually is not an issue in most cases when governance authorities implement adaptation measures. So this needs to be embedded, let's say, from day one in this type of policies. But good news is, if we are able to develop, for instance, climate mitigation policies that generate positive environmental co-benefits, such as improved air quality, this can help reduce environmental inequalities, because lower income households and vulnerable groups tend to benefit more from these effects. So you can actually achieve kind of win-win situations. So just a few suggestions on the way forward. What we need, therefore, if we really want to address is, first, of course, a smart policy mix that achieves a kind of a win-win social, climate mitigation, climate adaptation policies, taking into account these distributional effects, but also linking this to health, education, social care, social welfare policies, as well as transport, employment policies, and at a very local level, spatial planning, housing, urban design. So it's really a kind of comprehensive strategy that needs to be developed to take all of these considerations on board. And there is, of course, also the element of timing that is very important. Mitigating social impact should not start after the implementation of measures, right? It should start before. So that's one big thing. Second, you need policy processes that are inclusive. In order to create that smart policy mix, you need to engage with people, with organizations, with stakeholders, hear their ideas, their views, their suggestions, create a buy-in, etc. Have also these bottom-up approaches. Third, and that's very crucial, and I think it was referred to already before, we also need a convincing narrative, explaining the goals, how to get there, explain the co-benefits, showcasing how policies will improve the daily life of people. Use also words that people understand and can connect with. I think this is really crucial. And the fourth and final point I want to mention is there is also what I would call the back office, right? Overall, there is a crucial need for a complete picture of the distributional effects and a deep and systemic understanding of the extent to which transition to a carbon-neutral economy affects social justice. It's not only the distributional effects of carbon taxes that we relatively well know about, but also all kind of other measures that should be included in this. So there is still significant research gaps, and so I think the scientific community needs to help policymakers to understand this better. And I also think that the social issues need to be better integrated in the modeling, impact assessments, and these kind of things. So we need better data, we need better monitoring, we need better reporting and evaluation so that policies can be adjusted over time. And to conclude, I would say, yes, of course, the EU and national climate policies draw attention to vulnerable groups. There is a lot of narrative around it, and we always say that we should be social and fair and just. But I think when it comes to implementations, the solutions remain very scarce. We have developed by now the just transition mechanism that is being implemented, but the scope of it is very limited, the budgets are limited, the regional focus is also very narrowly defined. We have the recovery plans, very important instrument that includes some of these elements. There is a big potential, I think, regarding the ETS revenues beyond the climate fund that is being discussed, because ETS revenues will increase drastically, and I think there is a big discussion that should take place regarding redistribution. But what I would like to mention as a very nice way forward is to focus a bit more attention to the idea to develop social climate plans. This is part of the package, let's say. In the Commission proposal says member states should come up with a plan to explain what they want to do with the revenues dedicated in the social climate fund. I think we should use this as a way to really engage and have a strategy around the social transition. The better these plans are, the better the implementation can be, and I think this can be a smart tool. So that's about it, and happy to react to questions and compliment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We've heard a lot about the just transition. I mean, all of our speakers have just mentioned it. What is this? How, the level of inequity? We're starting from a point of not just ensuring the just transition, but we're starting from a point of massive inequity, not just in Europe, but around the world. So how do we deal with that? And how do we kind of linking that to the point you just made, Said, of, there's so many people out there who just are not through any fault of their own, but just not part of this journey. They can't access this journey we're all on of the great Green Deal transition. So coming to a question we had from the audience actually online, which is partly to do with this, like how do we reach those people? I mean, we've got a lot of plans, we've got a lot of talk, we've got a lot of ideas, what must be done, but how to actually reach people out there, educating them, informing them, bringing them in on the transition, on the transformation. So is there a role for social media, for example, and then how to counter, this is part of the question, how to deal with the Trumps of this world? The forces, the dark forces who are working against us or working against the progressives, working against implementing the Green Deal as we speak. And we've seen them all over Brussels in the last 6 months, many of them out there. So how do we, and also in the member states, there are a lot of people who are out there communicating fake news, communicating all kinds of things. So the question to all of our speakers is how to deal with the Trumps of this world without compromising on free speech, but how essentially do we reach everybody and bring them on board? I will ask first of all, I don't know if Arthur, are you still there with us? Did you hear that?
Yes, I heard that. I think in terms of reaching the people, I agree that this is going to be a particular important task during the coming months. Now that they are all facing increased spending on energy in particular, but also on food in the coming months, and that we might have a very harsh winter. So that will require mobilizing the people. And that starts, as I was rightly saying, explaining to people. And that is something at the moment I would think that politicians are not really doing that. I think at the moment I get sometimes the feeling that this is going to go away, this crisis and this transition and this transformation. So we'll just wait and sit it out. But I don't think that we'll have that. So the next months are going to be crucial. And I think that the Czech presidency can play an important role because they have been dealing with issues like energy poverty in the past. They know how difficult this topic is to be grabbed, and that needs to be taken forward. The Trumps and consorts, I think we just need to leave them behind if they don't want to move forward. And we will have to embark on measures like the CBAM or trade measures at the end of the day. But I hope that this is not going to happen within the next half year and making things even more complicated and complex as they are already. Thank you.
Thank you, Arthur. I'm going to ask you a supplementary question while we can hear you loud and clear. And this is also an additional question for our two panelists in the room. What are your top 3 priorities for the Czech presidency? What do you think they need to do as a question of urgency? Arthur?
I think, of course, first and foremost important thing is to get this package through in the coming 6 months and to make sure that all the trilogues are being held and they come up out successfully. And as I tried to indicate, even with a higher rate of ambition, taking in particular into account the new challenges that come with the Russian aggression towards the Ukraine. Because I think one of the speakers was saying that this will go away one day. I'm not quite sure. I think that we are in front of a kind of new world order that is going to be there for some time. And I think that is something we need to prepare for. And the Fit for 55 package is a good starting point. As I said, increasing the renewables target, increasing energy efficiency, making sure that the money that we have, and Sirpa was pointing to that from the recovery program, that more of that is going to be on these particular topics, also curbing energy demand, and then mobilizing people. to really get us through the difficult time in the coming 12. I think that's something where the Czech presidency will have to focus on. The international side, I mentioned briefly the next big conference in Sharm el-Sheikh. Here it will be important to keep the whole train on track. With these changing geopolitics, also the climate negotiations are going to become more difficult, particularly as finance is going to become scarce because there's so much more money that has been spent on the energy bill, on the food bill, but then also on defense. We should not forget that, and at a certain point also for rehabilitation. So I think many developing countries will be wondering what is going to be left for them. And that is something that is driving climate negotiations in a strong manner. So some thought will have to be given during the Czech presidency on all those questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Artur. So we see actually this whole environmental agenda and just transition social agenda is actually part of the geopolitical agenda, not just to make this whole new world that's just been described, that is this just a blip, or is this just the way this kind of reformation and the reorganization of geopolitical power, what impact will that have on climate, on the biodiversity talks later this year? So to the two of you, what are the priorities that need to be dealt with in the next 6 months as urgencies, and also how to bring in everybody on board, especially as what we just heard, rising prices for everybody. This is squeezing people's minds to be able to even focus on these complex issues. How do we bring everybody on board, and what are the immediate priorities for the Czech presidencies? Would you like to Sirpa? Over to you.
Thank you. If we start with the Czech presidency, very much, if I heard right what was said, it is first and foremost the Repower EU, the Fit for 55, of course, and then the coming process and the nature restoration package to start the negotiation and sort of to start creating a good spirit on there. Then about these others, a bit tougher questions, how to reach the people and how to do social transition. Firstly, and now I just want to underline and remind you, I'm not social democrat, I come from EPP, and I'm economist and by training. But basically we need to combat the tax evasion and the erosion of the society. And this is global, long-term. Milton Friedman is dead, but his ghost is still wandering around, problem what we have. Because all these kind of targeted things, okay, now it is the diesel price, now it is the food, now it is the fee, now it is the COVID and doctors. It just creates a chaos. And the wealthy are getting wealthier, and actually this is not even good for the economy, because after a certain point you can't quite rationally use anymore your money. You just sit on it in like whatever the duck was, the Donald Duck. And then people could pay substantially more taxes. And this OECD tax policy is one of my sort of a chain of a hope, one what you call it, a piece in this chain of hope. And we started quite modestly with the company taxes, but we should progress with the personal taxations and tax evasion and all that. And that could give us up to 500 billion every year up on EU, more money on our national budgets. And then if you put there then the universality principle, healthcare, education, minimum wages, and sort of a minimum social security when people are in need. Voila. You do not need to go every time, and then you give much more freedom for people to choose where they spend their money. So this is sort of actually, I think, in social transition. I'm eager to hear Said your comment on this. The effective, and we should be able to put loads of money on that, because the minimum security can't mean 500 euros per month. We were talking about 1,500 or something in this scale. How to reach? This is a bit tougher one. We have a lot of lifelong learning and civic learning and educational organizations. Maybe this could be some sort of a chain to break this social media fake news effect. But this is a real tough, and I think that here all the NGOs, all the educational systems, all whatever basic national civic organizations should do something. Then here I do not know how to deal with Trumps of the world. But certainly they are not poor. Le Pen is not poor. Trump is not poor. They are using the poor people. And actually, Jussi Halla-aho, the leader of the True Finns in Finland, has married one of the richest family and has loads of money himself. Come on. And then how to open up that the people are just the fuel for their political, populistic purposes. That's the point. And this is a real worry, because this kind of a populism, neo-Nazism, and whatever you call it's on a race all over the world. Even in India, even in some people say in China, not to talk about what happens in Europe and USA. And basically that links then back to this kind of a sort of a civic education, understanding, sort of making people to think why actually we all are doing what we are doing, not to try to make this people's lives more difficult but better. And last but not least, and I really would like to engage, maybe you do it, some psychologists in the work, and this is how you engage with people, how you tell the story, how you deal with that all sort of neglect and mirroring and whatever phenomena there are. And maybe this discussion could also help the issue that how you break, actually, I'm not talking about brainwashing, but people's sort of a patterns of seeing world. And this is someone is taking something out of me. No, I don't want that to happen. And how to build what you were talking about, the positive narrative instead on this side. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. I had a signal that we've got a few more minutes for our debate, so I would like you to think, before we hear back from Said, I'd like you to think, audiences, that we're going to throw the floor open to questions, so prepare, think about if you want to ask a question, fewer statements and more like actual questions related to, is there going to be a Green Deal Mock 2, I think it was called, and will there be, is the Green Deal future-proof? Is it all going to stay intact? So think about those questions now. Said, what would you like to react to the questions that we have?
Yeah, quickly 3 points. Maybe the first is, yes, these geopolitical events are very challenging because the prices are high today and solutions are longer term, right? You know, if you want to replace your old heating system with heat pumps or whatever, I mean, it takes time. But on the other hand, it can also be an opportunity because now is the time to invest. People realize that it is very smart to invest in solar panels because the return on investment, you know, is rather soon, right? It's a couple of years. Same applies to other type of investments. So if we succeed in kind of giving money to people to invest at very low rates or maybe even for free for some really vulnerable people, I mean, this is now the moment, right? And I think people know it, that it is useful to do it. Huh? That's the first point. Second point, regarding the presidency, obviously we all know the role of the presidency in the first place is to facilitate deals, to try to bring all member states to agree and make, in this case also, one step further, make a deal with the parliament. So if, as Arthur and Sirpa said, the Czech can contribute to having a deal around the Fit for 55, that would be great, because then we can start really the implementation. One thing I want to single out, again, I repeat myself, but is this social climate plan that the member states need to make. There is nobody that prohibits them to start already the preparations and the processes to engage with all kinds of stakeholders, with civil society, with the trade unions, with experts at the national level, to think, okay, guys, what are the challenges here and how can we solve it? What are the instruments we have? Some of the instruments come from Europe, but others we have at the national level or even regional level. And this brings me to my third point, how to reconnect with people. I think it's very much also to maybe give more attention to the very local level, to where people live. How actually a successful Green Deal will also create a better life, a better quality of life, nicer cities, with not only less greenhouse gas emissions, but also less air pollution, maybe less car traffic accidents, and these kind of things. Stories that people can connect with. And I know that the European Commission, is doing a lot of efforts to try to reach out to cities. They have developed a climate pact. They have launched this new European Bauhaus concept that is much about the city of the future and how we should live in the future, etc. These are nice attempts, but I think we can do more. The mission 100 climate neutral cities is a nice way to try to develop a kind of comprehensive approach at the local level. It's now limited to the front runners in a way, even though there are some others, but it's just a tiny part of all the cities. But this kind of things, I think, can help for people to understand what it means in practice, because we need to really start explaining that it's not only about greenhouse gas emissions, but it's really about transforming the way we live, and that if we do it successfully, it is actually an improvement, and that it's something positive. So that would be my my message, and maybe we should also reflect a bit how we can do this in the education systems throughout Europe. I mean, I know this is a national competence or regional in some countries, so it's very difficult to interfere. But maybe we can offer at the European level a process, offer our expertise. Work together with pedagogue people, with people expert in education, to see how we can translate the Green Deal in something that we can teach for young people, so that they understand and they contribute to the transition. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Sirpa, you just wanted to say a word before I throw the floor open for questions. If you have a question, indicate already to those people with microphones, so we're ready to go.
Actually, I'm throwing a question to you. Ooh. What do we do with the middle-aged white Caucasian male? And actually, if you look any of these media polls and others, what is interesting, actually, that we have a huge drift going on. On the other side, we have urban living, highly educated, middle-class people, and up from there. And then we have overload of female, and the female residents are moving from rural sites to urban areas and getting education. You know all the story. There we do not have an issue with the environment or anything. Then we get those people that are left back there, that are not so well educated, quite often with this kind of SME, lower level entrepreneurial rural background. Nothing wrong with that. But a lot of these constraints and problems on their lives, actually you can't see this kind of a glory future there, not even a girlfriend. And this is not a joke. Then, okay, there you have these people that have the highest level of believers and voters for Trumps and Le Pen's and whatever, because futures has nothing to offer. And basically what Trumps can give and Jussi Halla-aho can give them, nothing, I mean, but at least you can sort of put your middle finger when you are up, when you are voting. And then I think that's something that it is very arrogant for me to joke about it like this, but this is true. And somehow we would need to deal with that issue, but I don't know how. And God knows how many times I've tried and I've spoken to that kind of a whatever mink farmers or whatever there. But we just do not connect. It doesn't work that way that I go there and explain them that, okay, you know about climate change and biodiversity and so on.
Thank you very much for that. We won't ask the audience to respond to that. Questions from the audience?
Please don't.
Questions from the audience, please. This is your chance to ask. To Faustine, first of all. Faustine from the Institute for European Environment Policy.
Yeah, thank you. Can you hear me? Good. Yes, I'll try to be brief, and thanks for introducing me. Joe, I don't have to introduce myself anymore. So I just wanted to actually link the discussion of this panel to yesterday's results of the barometer. One of the striking results was that over a third of the respondents believe that member states are the main barriers to the implementation of the European Green Deal. And we know that the Commission was very happy to insist on the fact that the nature restoration law, for instance, and the sustainable use of pesticides or plant protection products directive had been put forward, but we know that the real game starts now with the co-decision, and in particular the risks that the Council dismantles what has been proposed by the European Commission. So my question to you is, given that we have a member of the European Parliament here and a former member of the European Parliament here, how can platforms like Think2030 support the work, in particular, of the European Parliament through co-decision to counterbalance the heavyweight, not always in the right direction of the Council?
Who would like to answer? Said? Go.
I have one suggestion, is to stay science-based. You know, we have a climate law that has been adopted by the Council, by the Parliament, and of course by the Commission. And this climate law is very clear. We need to achieve a minus 55% reduction by 2030 and be climate neutral by 2050. And so what you could do is to just try to calculate the results that come out of the Council, the results that come out of the Parliament. Where does it bring us, right? Is it 55 or is it less? And if it's less, then of course you need to say, guys, you are not in agreement with yourself because you committed yourself to this 55% target. So how are you going to close the gap? I mean, this is the type of messages. And of course, maybe there are different scenarios. Maybe you can be a little bit more ambitious on one side and to compensate some measures that you want to water down a bit. But I think it's about showcasing where are we today and what are the scenarios and how far are we from actually the things that you agreed with, right? I mean, this could be a way.
Thank you.
Very briefly, I agree, and this is why this kind of a think tank and what we discussed is so important. Just to add one point, we would need to think how to automatically update the existing legislation. If 55 is now the figure, what it is, it could be lower or higher after 5 years, for example, and not always sort of wait for the political decision about it. And this was the idea in taxonomy and delegated acts, and you all know how it went. And it is the Council who wants to sort of micromanage the delegated acts as if they would be implemented acts.
Okay, thank you very much. Any more questions? And we'll then bring Arthur, who hopefully is still with us on the train. Other questions? Who would like to? The lady in the blue.
Hi, thank you. My name is Andrea Ferret. I work at the French Water Partnership as a program officer for biodiversity. But my question is about the way you mentioned the cost of non-action and how you can leverage that to sort of encourage compliance. And I can see how that would work for adaptation measures, but considering that climate change is going to affect countries all over the world at different levels and in different ways, but considering the fact that emissions from European countries are not as important as, like, considering the whole emissions of the whole world, you know? How can you leverage the cost of non-action for mitigation measures? How do you tell countries, well, you have to transition, which is very costly, which takes a lot of efforts, because otherwise you're going to suffer those effects. But countries know that they are going to suffer effects whatever happens. So I see how you can leverage that for adaptation. How do you adapt that discourse for mitigation action?
Thank you. We're going to take a few more questions and then we'll have the panelists answer and provide their wrap-up final remarks at the same time. Other questions in the room? Yeah, thank you.
No, actually, just a very short comment because Sirpa asked a question on the how to take the rural population. I work for cities, but we see increasingly that there is a lot of linkages created between urban and rural areas that we can mutually inspire each other. For example, we have some cities coming with new plans for new ecological farming. And sometimes I see from the institutional angle that there is a bit of a division, rural and urban. And sometimes we forget about these intermediate areas, about the functional urban areas, where you also have the lack of services, the lack of proximity economy, and also a lot of, people from lower income groups move to those areas, and I think also the Gilets jaunes was very much a peri-urban phenomenon and not exclusively an urban phenomenon. So I think we need to increase these linkages, invest in local food systems because COVID, but also the current energy crisis shows that the regional and local level are the best spaces actually to implement the Green Deal, but also increase Europe's strategic economy. So I think we need to work on these linkages and also explain better the benefits of investing in the local economy and those local Green Deals that we're working on.
Okay, thank you. We have last chance for more questions about the Green Deal implementation or future, what really needs to happen. Any more questions from the floor? One question? Then we're done.
Sylvain Vunier. What happened if this agreement on 55% is not, if it's not reached?
Okay, good. A very simple, quick question. If you can just wrap up in just 1 minute, answers to the questions and your final remarks. I'll pass the floor first to Sirpa, then Said, and then to Artur, who's still with us.
Thank you. Just firstly, thank you for very good comment and inspirational, good ideas. How to get all countries on board? Joint initiatives and investments quite often can be things like that. Not to tell only to African continent what you need to do, but besides, because you can't give all the money what you need, why not to invest heavily with our money on solar production in Northern Africa? That actually secures the energy production and decent money flow for them in the future. And a lot of this. Then I have a lot of belief in private businesses and finances on sort of gearing the money so that you wouldn't get so much wrong type of the investments in developing countries. Then what was the other question?
It was the question on how to ensure that what do we do if we don't reach 55?
If we don't actually, well, this is the fear. We should start talking about it. And usually, I don't say nowadays that this is what we need to commit. I say that if you listen to science, it says it is not enough, it's not adequate, and we would need to be talking about closer 75% reduction in EU because you need the global balance also. So this is actually the talk we would need to be talking, and the science telling the politicians, and this comes back to this idea that I had that you would need to have this kind of a automatic update of the legislation so that you are not stuck with some number you put ages ago on paper.
Said, briefly?
Yeah, I mean, very quickly. I mean, obviously, climate mitigation is a global issue. We are emitting, I think, about 8% of global emissions. But if you look at consumption, it's about 15%. So I think this element will have to be included much more. And that's why the CBAM mechanism can be an interesting tool because it's actually also an invitation to third countries to start a conversation with us around how they can actually also develop their own systems to, include carbon pricing, so that they actually can keep the revenues of it rather than to make their industries pay for the European Union, right? So I think there are a number of things, and of course, we need to use the diplomatic tools, and it's a kind of very big, broad exercise. But I think how to calculate the cost of non-action, I know it's a brilliant idea, but it's very difficult to calculate and to make it kind of concrete at a more individual, personal level. But we still, nevertheless, I would say, need to do it to show the scale, the magnitude of it, and it can be easily translated into what it can cost a country or a person even in the longer term, and it can be part of a story or a narrative. But it's not the only solution. Regarding the 55%, I mean, it's obvious that if we would not achieve it, we would, just not do what we promised to do ourselves, even internationally, because you know that in the context of the Paris Agreement, we pledged actually to do that. But I am actually not so pessimistic. I mean, if you see what is on the table now, I mean, there is a deal somehow in the Council, there is a deal in the Parliament, negotiations will start soon, so the mechanics, let's say, to get there are in place, technologies are evolving fast, maybe the pace of the kind of economies of scale that we thought a few years ago may be a bit slower, meaning that the price of technologies may not go down so quickly because of all kinds of reasons, raw materials, the international crisis, etc., inflation. But still, it's clear that also it becomes a business case, right? And I think that's also what you emphasizes a lot. It's not, it's not a sunk cost becoming sustainable, right? It has so many benefits, obviously in terms of quality of life, but also economically, that we need to keep emphasizing this, that this is the only way forward, and yeah.
Thank you, Said. We're going to give the final word on this session, which is all focused on the next steps for Green Deal implementation, to Arthur. Arthur, if you can bring Arthur back on the screen. Thank you for staying with us. What are your final remarks? Very briefly, because we're running out of time. What was your final message to the people in the room and online here?
I think, first of all, I would agree with Said. I'm not pessimistic when it comes to getting to a deal on the Fit for 55. If you look at the positions of Parliament and Council, they are not all that far away from each other. What worries me more is, are we then going to really implement the Fit for 55 and all the provisions that are there? Because that depends very much on the investments that are going to happen in the coming 2, 3, 4, 5 years in order to reach in 2030 really minus 55 or even more, which is, I think, even necessary when you look at the issue of energy sovereignty and an increase in renewables and energy efficiency targets. On the non-action and the cost of non-action, I think that is going to be a central topic in the international negotiations next year in the global stocktake. And in order to build up the pressure, we have the IPCC report, which gives a good indication in terms of what's in the cards if countries are not acting on climate in the coming years. So to exploit that report to its fullest and to increase the pressure, I think is also going to increase the pressure on mitigation action. And my last little remark goes back to the first question, if I understood correctly, was on the nature restoration law. I think it's eminently important that civil society is going to follow the co-decision process right from the beginning and is very active, because otherwise this might fall apart. I think all my previous speakers have been talking about how difficult it is to deal with land issues and with the strong lobbies that are there. So I could only encourage everybody in the room to come in strongly in supporting the entire process, which is starting now when the Commission is explaining the nature restoration law, to build in the member states. This Commission still will have a strong nature restoration law. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Artur. You were just cutting out at the end. Indeed, what's really on the agenda coming up right now is not just the nature restoration, the co-decision. It's a really strong message to send to the room and to people in the audience watching. Co-decision being on the case to avoid those vested interests, typically taking over on the Restore Nature proposal, and also the sustainable use of plant protection products. There's going to be as many vested interests in the halls of Brussels as there were earlier this year on energy. I'm sure they're already setting up their stalls. So that's a strong message. I'd like to quickly thank very much, after a round of applause, Serpa and Saeed for your very interesting comments. And we're going to move to the next session, if you could leave the stage. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And I'd now like to welcome onto the stage for our final wrap and really interesting remarks we're about to have Arantxa González, who is former, hola, ¿cómo estás? Former Spanish Minister for Foreign Affairs and Dean of the Paris School of International Affairs at Sciences Po. I'm welcoming Arantxa González. Buenos dias, onto the stage here, who's going to make a few final comments to this two-day conference. So thank you for staying with us. I'm sure you've been listening closely to all that's been discussed, from the future of farming to the future of Fit for 55 to a plant-based society in terms of nature, biodiversity. We've had a whole lineup of speakers from all of the institutions and from all of the different civil society interest groups. There's a lot on our plate. What do you think? What needs to happen?
Well, first, let me thank you let me thank Think2030 for choosing Sciences Po to host this conference. I've been sitting at the backbenching they call it, and I've learned a lot through this conference. And I think this is a very valuable exercise because at the end of the day, as one of you said, this is a huge societal effort. And it cannot work if we don't mobilize the entire society. And obviously, this is a great place to mobilize society. This is the younger generation. Climate change is a huge priority for this House, both in terms of research as well as in terms of teaching, which should come as no surprise. Therefore, what I can say, Joe, is that maybe if you want to host it next year, you'll have a very opening and welcoming place here in Sciences Po. The backdrop of this conference is the Fit for 55, and I have no doubt in my mind that the package will be adopted. And it will be adopted simply because this is a political priority for Europe. But also because while this package has been cooking, there is war on our continent that basically brings a huge urgency in getting this done. Because now it's no longer just simply about sustainability, and sustainability is a big issue. It's about security. And it's security with capital S. So I've got no doubt in my mind that this package will go through. Now, the question that we have to focus on, and I was really glad to hear that throughout the sessions, is one of implementation. How do we make sure that this package is implemented? And I've heard 4 things that I wanted to throw back at you as a parting comments that I think matter a lot. First is the narrative. And this is about citizens. This is about our societies. What narrative do we want to use? Using it constantly so that the narrative should not disappear because Fit for 55 has been adopted, but how can we keep this narrative at the center of our political screen? And I like a lot the idea that we make the cost of non-action also part of our narrative, because at the end of the day, this is what we have to be aware of, from small little farmer to big business and anybody else in between. And I think the narrative, we should remember, is as much an issue for Europeans as it is for third countries. So we should not forget that this narrative is also something we have to cultivate vis-à-vis third countries. We should not be talking to ourselves only. We have to engage the third countries if we are to be successful, because this is a systemic issue. It's not just, as one of you just simply asked, it's not just simply by Europeans acting. We need to convince others that we have to do this together. The second part of implementation has to do with business. Business with capital B, business with little b, small, medium, micro. Some businesses have organized themselves. We've heard this from the automobile sector. Some are harder to organize because they are much more atomized, because it's much harder. They live in more isolated places. It's a way of life issue. This is the agro-food sector, and I think that this is an area where I would suggest you put a bit more effort for the implementation phase. Third, I think the guardian of these efforts, which is the European Commission, should also not disappear from the screen when the Fit for 55 is adopted. We need the European Commission to continue to work. The work will change. It will be more on the monitoring, how the implementation is proceeding, on a bit of prodding, on a bit of cajoling, on a bit of barking, on a lot of benchmarking to make sure that this collective effort moves forward. Fourth and final, and this is a very important one, and Said mentioned this, and I want to echo his words. We need to manage well the social costs of the transition. This was already important. Today is even more important because the economic outlook is not looking good. Because inflation is on the rise, because the cost of the structural transformation that we need to undertake will be harder to achieve. And therefore we have to put a bigger premium on ensuring fairness and equity. We do not lack the instruments, whether we want to call it a social climate fund, whether we want to call it Next Generation EU for Fit for 55. It doesn't matter how we call it, we've got the means to do it. We need to get the political priority to this clearly if we want to keep citizens, all our citizens on board, because this will be a costly exercise. And we should not pretend that it's not going to cost, because if it doesn't cost, it's not going to be structurally transforming. So let me finish, Joe, by just simply saying that here in Sciences-Po we will continue to work a lot on research. I want to also encourage all of you in this room, whether you're in the research institutions or in the think tanking, to anchor very firmly the next steps into science-based, which is our best hope to convince everyone of the need to move forward and to do this in a manner that will get us to where we want to go in 2030, but also, let's not forget, that's only half of the way in 2050. Thank you again for this opportunity that you've given to Sciences-Po to host you, and again, looking forward to next year's edition.
Well, thank you from all of us for hosting us. That's been very kind. It's been a beautiful garden last night. Those of us had the chance to appreciate, and amazing facilities, and very warm welcome from you, and amazing food, actually, I have to say as well. I have a couple of desserts here on the side. I just wanted to say, before I pass to the final word to Sebastian Trea, one of our co-hosts from IDRI, also co-hosted this event for the Institute for European Environment Policy in Brussels, with a lot of the hardworking team behind the scenes. We should probably thank them as well, because there's been a lot of people putting this together and working hard already. I know you're probably going to say the same thing, but I just wanted to say that now, so we'll save the applause to when Sebastian mentions you again, but I want to just say thank you for all of the hard work. There's so many people behind the scenes of this kind of event. And also just say a final word as well, which we started today, actually, with a message from Jorge, from One World, from UNEP, talking about inequity, and that we in Europe, when we think about the European Green Deal, we shouldn't think about the global inequity, also the inequity in Europe. And we finished the day with you, Arantxa, saying we need political priority to fairness and equity, because otherwise we need to channel the energy which is going to be rising up on the streets and channel that into whatever we call the social climate plan or whatever that needs to. This is an opportunity. And also we heard a big message loud and clear, I think, from all of the speakers, that there's a huge task ahead and it's urgent. So the more we work together, the more we all work with IDRI and with IEP, the bigger chance we have to get this done. So I'd like to say just from me, thank you very much for being a great audience online and here. I'll pass the final word to Sebastian.
Thank you so much, Jo. So I think actually the first thing is to thank you, Jo, for getting us here. Thank you very much. You've been extremely useful to this event. A few words just of closure from the co-organizers, and I think I can speak on behalf of IEP. I've heard a lot from the audience that this conference has been extremely informative, and not just on the state of negotiations or the recent analysis of proposals by think tanks, but also very frank exchanges on the political state of play behind the scenes. And I think that's really what this is about in Sciences Po and in think tanks, that we look both at the science that looks at the numbers that are irrefutable in climate and ecology, but also at the political side, or analyzing how political players are there. And I was really amazed by the speakers, really happy and honestly looking at being very open about the strategies of countries, of political parties, of segments of the population. This is really the type of conversations that we need. So being both analytical, science-based, and at the same time staying analytical but not shying away from discussing power relations and political strategies. And so we've done as if we were all aligned behind the strategies. I'm not sure, there was a variety of players in the room, but to some extent, I think we've been trying to design the coalition strategy for winning it over and have the Green Deal #2 and being on time in 2050, as you said, Arantxa, with what science says we need to be. So that was extremely interesting, and I think we've begun to build also the platform of think tanks that could be a kind of a mirror group that we can offer the European Parliament and across presidencies until 2024 to just be able to have the think tank's capacity behind the ministries for the environment. Of course, also, we hope behind the ministries of finance, because if we manage to talk to them, it's going to be more efficient even. So I think it would be really great to have another Think2030 event in Paris. The next event is actually foreseen to happen in Sweden, probably during the Swedish presidency, but that's still to be organized. But that's, we'll come back to Paris. Idri is going to make sure with Sciences Po that we'll come back to Paris. So I also wanted to thank the audience because the hybrid mode has been, I would say, acrobatic. I hope you will appreciate the understatement. We've been experiencing new challenges. Being hacked by somebody during the presentation of DG Sanko was really not what we expected, and that was terrible. We apologize again to the people in the audience and to the speaker from DG Sanko. We lost also Diederik Samson from Timmermans' cabinet just at the moment he wanted to talk back to us. So very complicated. Thanks for bearing with these complicated issues. Really, yes, of course, wanted to thank the speakers for their contributions to the debate. It was very relevant and very resilient to the conditions that were not always easy. And I really appreciate a lot your good help and faith in the conference. And really stress again the fact that the audience has been extremely interested in what we've been discussing today. So that's thanks to the speakers and to the questions from the audience. And of course, as Jo stated, there are lots of people behind the scene that you have not seen who made it all possible, who were the ones resisting the problems with calm, creativity, reactivity, and I'm really amazed. So thanks a lot to the organization team at IEP, at IDRI, also the people at Sciences Po, because this was really teamwork, not always easy, and that was really very important. And a special thanks to Clara from IEP, who was there from the beginning to make that really happen. So thanks a lot. Now it's really time for closure. Sorry to be even nearly longer as Arantxa, but I needed to say that because it was a very useful but complicated meeting. I think nobody left because of the technical issues, because it was so interesting on the substance. Thanks a lot, and see you next time in Paris or in Stockholm. Thank you.